For centuries, China stood as the world's economic powerhouse, a beacon of innovation and prosperity. Its vast resources, skilled artisans and sophisticated systems of governance allowed it to flourish, becoming the envy of nations far and wide. The nation was famed for its exquisite silks, a fabric so luxurious and sought after that it became synonymous with wealth and refinement. Its porcelain, delicate yet durable, was a testament to Chinese craftsmanship, gracing the tables of emperors and nobles across the globe. And then there was tea, a beverage that transcended mere refreshment, becoming a cultural cornerstone and a highly prized commodity that everyone wanted. The Ming and Qing dynasties, with their majestic imperial courts and intricate bureaucratic systems, presided over a largely self-sufficient empire supremely confident in its own abundance and viewing the outside world with a degree of detachment. China, with its vast agricultural lands and thriving internal markets, simply didn't need much from the outside world, and this inherent self-reliance profoundly shaped its foreign relations, dictating the terms of engagement with other nations. For the countless daily transactions that fueled its vast economy, copper coins, readily available and easily divisible, sufficed. But when it came to major deals, large-scale trade, and most importantly, the payment of taxes to the imperial treasury, only silver, the gleaming white metal, would do. The government's unwavering demand for taxes to be paid in silver, a policy rigorously enforced across the empire, created a massive and insatiable internal need for the precious metal, driving up its value and transforming it into the lifeblood of the Chinese economy. As a result, silver became significantly more valuable in China than virtually anywhere else in the world, relentlessly drawing it in from across the globe like a powerful vortex pulling in resources from distant lands. China didn't need to conquer lands or wage wars to acquire silver. Its unique economic structure, fueled by demand and self-sufficiency, acted as a powerful magnet, inexorably pulling silver eastward. Western nations, particularly those in Europe, found themselves in a peculiar predicament. They desperately wanted Chinese goods, from silk to porcelain to tea, but they had very little that China desired in return, creating a significant trade imbalance. The only way for these nations to acquire the coveted tea and porcelain was to pay in the one commodity China truly valued: silver. China, holding all the cards, set the terms of engagement: no bartering, no goods in exchange, just pure, unadulterated silver. This dynamic, driven by Chinese demand and Western desire, effectively made China the world's silver sink, profoundly shaping global trade patterns and influencing the course of world commerce for centuries to come. The seemingly insatiable hunger of the West for Chinese luxuries meant that a steady and seemingly endless stream of silver flowed relentlessly into the coffers of China. This persistent trade imbalance, however, would ultimately have profound and far-reaching consequences for both sides of this global exchange. From the outside, China's dominance appeared unassailable, its power absolute, but its growing reliance on silver, while fueling its prosperity, would eventually become a significant vulnerability, a chink in its otherwise impenetrable armor. The world's silver, mined from distant corners of the earth, relentlessly moved east, enriching China beyond measure and fueling an unprecedented era of economic growth and cultural flourishing. But as we'll soon discover, this seemingly inexhaustible flow of wealth would not last forever, and the tides of fortune would eventually begin to turn. The stage was now irrevocably set for a dramatic and transformative shift in the global balance of power. The allure of silver, with its promise of wealth and prosperity, undeniably made China rich. But it also inadvertently set the stage for future conflict and unforeseen consequences, a trap laid by the very thing that brought it such success. So let's delve deeper and explore how this global silver obsession ultimately changed the world, forever altering the destinies of nations and empires. China, for a significant period, maintained a firm grip on its foreign trade policies. This control was largely exercised through what became known as the Canton system, a meticulously structured framework that heavily restricted Western merchants, confining their activities to the single port of Canton, now known as Guangzhou. Within this system, only a select group of Chinese merchants, known as the Hong, were authorized to engage in trade with these foreigners, acting as intermediaries and gatekeepers to the vast Chinese market. This arrangement was designed to ensure China maintained its economic advantage and control over its interactions with the outside world, carefully managing the flow of goods and wealth. The lifeblood of this trade, the silver that fueled its engine, originated primarily from the Americas, extracted from incredibly rich and productive mines like the legendary Potosi in Bolivia and the extensive silver-laden veins of Mexico. This Spanish-controlled silver then embarked on a journey across vast oceans, with a portion heading west across the expansive Pacific Ocean to Manila, in the Philippines, before ultimately making its way to China. Another significant stream of silver traveled east, traversing through Europe and continuing its journey onward to the insatiable markets of Asia. Historians, after extensive research and analysis, estimate that a staggering amount, perhaps up to half of all the silver extracted from the New World, eventually found its final destination within the borders of China. This wasn't a mere trickle or a small stream, it was an overwhelming torrent, a massive influx of silver that reshaped the economic landscape. This influx of silver acted as a supercharger, dramatically boosting and energizing China's economy, fueling its growth and expansion. The widespread adoption of silver as currency made business transactions significantly easier and more efficient, leading to the development of more sophisticated and complex markets, and ultimately causing the government's coffers to swell with unprecedented wealth. However, this increasing dependence on foreign silver, while initially beneficial, also created a hidden and potentially dangerous risk, a vulnerability that lay beneath the surface of prosperity. The question loomed, what would happen if the flow of silver were to suddenly stop, or even worse, if the direction of the flow were to be reversed? For centuries, the silver kept coming steadily without significant interruption, enriching China beyond measure, but also simultaneously making it increasingly vulnerable to external economic forces and fluctuations. The world's bullion flowed relentlessly east, driven by demand and trade imbalances, but this economic balance, seemingly robust, was in reality quite fragile and susceptible to disruption. The next chapter in this story would bring unforeseen challenges and ultimately test the true extent of China's economic might and resilience. Britain's love for Chinese tea silk and porcelain created a huge trade imbalance. China wanted little from Britain, so silver was the only acceptable payment. Ship after ship carried British silver to China, alarming economists and politicians. The drain threatened Britain's wealth and currency stability. British merchants tried selling wool and manufactured goods, but China wasn't interested. The East India Company, desperate to stop the outflow, searched for something China would buy. Profits from Chinese goods were high, but the national accounts looked grim. The silver drain became a national crisis. Britain needed a solution, not just for profit but to protect its economy. The search for a commodity to reverse the flow was on. This quest would lead to a fateful and destructive discovery. The answer would change the course of history. The stage was set for a new controversial trade. Britain, facing a significant trade imbalance with China, desperately sought a commodity to reverse the flow of silver. They needed something that the Chinese market craved, something that could shift the economic scales in their favor. Britain found its answer in opium, a powerful addictive drug grown in India under the watchful eye of the East India Company. The cultivation of opium became a cornerstone of British economic strategy. The East India Company, with its vast resources and influence, cultivated opium in Bengal, transforming fertile lands into sprawling poppy fields. This operation was meticulously organized and ruthlessly efficient. The company then auctioned the harvested opium to private traders, creating a complex web of commerce and exploitation. These auctions were pivotal in fueling the opium trade. These traders, driven by profit, smuggled it into China, defying Chinese law and fueling a growing addiction crisis. The clandestine nature of this trade added to its allure and danger. Opium had been used medicinally in China for centuries, a traditional remedy for various ailments. But British traders aggressively promoted recreational smoking, transforming a medicinal substance into a widespread addiction. They actively sought to expand the market for their product, regardless of the consequences. The addictive nature of opium, once understood, created a vast, reliable market, ensuring a steady stream of revenue for the British. The demand for opium seemed insatiable. The company profited immensely while maintaining plausible deniability, shielding itself from direct responsibility for the devastating consequences. They were letting private traders handle the risky business of smuggling and distribution, keeping their hands clean in the eyes of the law. Opium imports soared, from a few hundred chests in the early years to tens of thousands annually by the 1830s, flooding the Chinese market with the addictive substance. Silver now flowed out of China in staggering quantities to pay for opium, reversing the long-standing trade dynamic. This dramatic shift was reversing the trade imbalance that had plagued Britain for decades. Britain's deficit vanished almost overnight, replaced by unprecedented economic prosperity. But China's economic decline began, its wealth draining away to fuel British coffers. The silver problem, from Britain's perspective, was solved, but a far greater crisis was unleashed upon China, one with devastating social and economic consequences. Opium addiction spread rapidly throughout Chinese society, ensnaring people from all walks of life. This widespread addiction was devastating Chinese society, tearing apart families and undermining the very fabric of the nation. The British trade solution, designed to alleviate their own economic woes, became a national catastrophe for China, a crisis that threatened the stability of the entire empire. The opium trade's impact would soon reach every corner of the vast Chinese empire, leaving no province untouched by its destructive influence. The consequences of this trade would be dire, leading to conflict and further exploitation. China's response to this crisis, and its attempts to stem the flow of opium, would ultimately shape the coming conflict with Britain. Opium addiction swept through China, devastating all levels of society. Millions became dependent, unable to work or support their families. Communities suffered as savings vanished and crime rose. Productivity plummeted, fields went untended, officials neglected duties. Silver hemorrhaged out of the country, causing shortages and hardship. Peasants struggled to pay taxes as silver's value soared. The crisis deepened, threatening the empire's stability. The Daoguang emperor faced a moral and economic disaster. Debates raged: legalize and tax opium or stamp it out. The emperor chose to fight the drug, setting the stage for confrontation. The Daoguang emperor appointed Lin Zexu, a principled official, to eradicate the opium trade. Lin arrived in Canton in 1839, demanding foreign merchants surrender their opium. When they refused, he blockaded their factories, forcing compliance. Over 20,000 chests of opium were seized and publicly destroyed at Human Beach. This bold act was a declaration: China would not tolerate the drug trade. For Britain, it was an attack on property and trade. Tensions soared as both sides dug in. Lin's crackdown was a moral stand, but it gave Britain a pretext for war. The destruction of opium set the stage for armed conflict. War was now inevitable. News of Lin Zexu's actions outraged Britain. Parliament debated, but the pro-war faction prevailed. In 1840, Britain sent a powerful navy to China. The First Opium War began. British steam gunboats and advanced weaponry overwhelmed Chinese forces. Key cities fell and the Qing government was forced to sue for peace. The Treaty of Nanking in 1842 was humiliating. Hong Kong ceded 5 ports, opened a massive indemnity paid and low tariffs imposed. This was the first of many unequal treaties. China's sovereignty was shattered. The Opium Wars marked a turning point in global power. The West's dominance was now undeniable. China's long decline had begun. The Treaty of Nanking ushered in an era of unequal treaties, imposed by Western powers through force. China lost control over its borders, trade, and legal system. Foreigners enjoyed extraterritorial rights and special privileges in treaty ports. Spheres of influence carved up the country, eroding Qing authority. The century of humiliation began, a period of national shame and foreign domination. China suffered further defeats: the Taiping Rebellion, wars with France and Japan, and the Boxer Rebellion. Each calamity deepened the sense of loss and injustice. The Qing dynasty's prestige collapsed, fueling internal unrest. The memory of this era became central to modern Chinese identity. The Opium Wars were just the start of a long, painful decline. China's sovereignty was trampled, its destiny shaped by outsiders. The wounds of this period still shape China's worldview. The struggle for national dignity would define the next century. The Opium Wars shattered China's self-image as the Middle Kingdom. Military defeat and humiliating treaties forced a painful reckoning. Foreign goods flooded in, undermining local industries and draining wealth. The Qing dynasty's inability to protect China led to its fall in 1911. Decades of instability, warlordism, and civil war followed. The drive to restore sovereignty and erase humiliation fueled nationalism and revolution. Both the nationalists and communists drew strength from this legacy. Today, the memory of the Opium Wars shapes China's foreign policy and national identity. The story of silver, opium, and lost empire is a constant reminder of the dangers of weakness. The echoes of this era still influence China's path in the 21st century.